very briefly, this is an overview of what I plan to cover with you. After a brief introduction, we'll talk about how to structure a board, what its qualifications and composition is, then the role of directors, the role of board leadership, and a particularly detailed section on the role of the board in risk oversight, because this is an area of my own personal greater experience. And we'll end up with a general summary and a discussion of alternative ways that you can use to evaluate and measure the effectiveness of your board, and also, of course, to improve it. I'll go to the next slide. Try it up here. Let's see. There we go. By way of introduction, my purpose is to provide you with some guidelines for assessing the effectiveness of your board right now, but also ways to improve it by following best practices that we've gathered from 15 years of research by consultation with stock exchanges, professional associations, and leading experts. I mentioned concerning each of the elements of an effective board what the controlling laws and regulations are. And of course, they vary depending upon what kind of a company you have. So I'll mention those that are applicable to all the different kinds of companies. Secondly, after we do that, I'll present some alternative approaches that you can use for enhancing board effectiveness. That's where it does not seem to work, so we'll do this. All right, turning first to board structure and the number of directors. This number of directors depends on the size of your company. The general feeling is that for the very small companies, maybe 3 to 5 directors is ideal. For mid-sized companies with less than 25 million, probably 5 to 7 directors, and then for the large companies, up to 7 or 11 board members. The criterion for deciding on the size is based on 2 conflicting principles. One, the smaller the board, the more active members participate. However, the larger the board, the better chance you have of having representatives of the expertise and experience that you need. Having more than 11 board members, no matter how large the company is, often dilutes the degree of participation and engagement. Best practice says that every board needs a charter for its board and for their committees. Director effectiveness is substantially enhanced by following a very clear published charter of governance principles and company objectives and missions. The first requirement I'll mention is the New York Stock Exchange requires that each listed company have a charter of its business conduct and disclose its charter publicly, and that the charter includes the responsibilities of directors, directors' access to management, compliance standards, how to deal with conflicts of interest, reporting of illegal or unethical behavior, and that there is, in fact, orientation and ongoing education of board members. It requires that the board deal with management succession and provide for an annual performance evaluation of the board. And that's why at the end I'll give you some examples of various firms besides ours so that you can consult for that purpose. So charters for board committees. And best practice suggests that the board have committees that are charters that are updated annually. In fact, the New York Stock Exchange requires committees on compensation, on audit, and on nominating governance, or their equivalent by whatever name. The alternative stock exchange does not require charters for committees, but they do encourage charters, particularly concerning the nomination process. This is something that is very desirable. I've run into a lot of boards that have not used matrix, and they tend to simply add people whom they know and like. The point of a matrix is that best practice suggests that each board set out a matrix that indicates for current and future needs, that has a representation of both functional and industry expertise, There is some balance by gender, race, ethnicity, geography, age, company staff, etc., as it's relevant to the company mission. This suggests that the matrix also include critical objectives and the criteria to achieve those objectives within a strategic plan. It is important in that matrix they do not rotate people just because of age, but keep people on until somebody with their qualifications is elected. This suggests that a broad diversity enhances effectiveness. It also suggests that there not be more than 50% of the board members over age 69, so that more current knowledge is introduced into the board. The matrix should be used to recruit new members, and it should be continually revised. The SEC requires the disclosure of the board policy on diversity and how it evaluates the board's effectiveness. Turning now to recruitment of directors, be independently recruited for each different position described in the matrix. These, of course, should reflect both future needs as well as present needs. Restrictions on who can be elected to a board. For example, board members under best practice should have a maximum of 3 who are full-time employed, a maximum of 5 who are retired and serving on other boards, including nonprofits. It should take into consideration that an effective board member will spend approximately 200 hours a year for each board. Members are encouraged to serve on other boards because it enhances their perspective. The New York Stock Exchange board members not have any prior commitments or conflicts that could interfere with their devotion to their company. The SEC requires that each director disclose all boards on which he or she has sat during the previous 5 years and any legal procedures in which he's been involved during the past 10 years. Orientation, it's interesting how specific the stock exchange requirements are on this, and best practice requires that there be an orientation program that is done continuously, and that this orientation includes a discussion of strategy, long-range plans, exposure to the financial statements, operations, the governance guidelines, and what the critical metrics are that the board and company use to measure their success, who their key constituencies are, and who are the senior executives. The board members need to be given an opportunity with key managers and suppliers and customers and shareholders. The New York Stock Exchange requires the director orientation be on a continuing basis. It also recommends an annual retreat. Congress is also given some guidelines. Of course, it should be based on the quality of their performance, but they should not be compensated for any services unrelated to their governance duties. A director should not have any interlocking directorships, any social affiliations, or other connections with company officers, so that they are keeping the company's interests in mind and not just their own personal relationships. It's for that reason that there's a lot of emphasis on the independence of some directors. The notion is that there should be independent directors, and that officers in senior management and or their families in some cases can serve on boards, but under limited circumstances. Best practices suggest that a significant number of members should be independent,